All right, my amazing artists. So we have been talking and learning about the color wheel. And we've learned that it's a really important tool for artists to have to help when they're choosing colors in their artworks and to know how colors interact with other colors. So we are going to take a little bit of creative license and we're going to turn our color wheel into an interesting picture. So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be creating a person in a raincoat with a rainbow umbrella, because I don't know about you, but if I have to have an umbrella, I want it to be super colorful. So the first thing that you need to have is you need to have your big white paper and a pencil. And like always, the first thing we do is write our name. So on the back of your paper, I want you guys to just go ahead and put your name, just like I've done here. And then of course, flip that paper over because we want our name to be on the back, not the front. All right. Once you've put your name on your artwork, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the umbrella, which is actually the color wheel part of it. So to do this, we're going to be drawing a couple straight lines, but we want our umbrella to take up a good portion of the paper, probably about half the paper. So it's going to be at the top. We don't want it to come way, way, way down here because we want room to have a person. We're not going to draw the whole person, just their bottom half. They're kind of going to be hiding underneath the umbrella. But I want you to watch my lines and see about how large they are on the paper so that you get an idea of where and you're going to put your lines and how large they're going to be. So we're going to start out with two simple diagonal lines that make an X. So coming up towards this top corner, notice I'm not touching. I'm going to draw a diagonal line. Remember, draw light until you know you got it right. So you don't need to press down really hard with that pencil. All right, so I have one diagonal line. I'm going to come over here to the other side. I want to start about the same height. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just do the best you can. And then I want it to, again, be around the same here. So I'm actually going to start it right over here. Notice that I just drew a ghost line from each side until I found around where I want my point to be. And again, lightly drawing a diagonal line that's going to go right through. And I'm just going to check. I think my lines are pretty close. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just do the best you can. Next, I'm going to draw a vertical line. Remember, vertical means going from top to bottom. So we're going to draw one long, straight vertical line. And if you notice, my line is going to actually start higher than the lines that I drew for my X. Not a lot higher, but a little higher. And lightly, I'm going to draw it so it goes straight through the center of the X. Now again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want it to come through the center of this X. So if you mess up, that's where drawing lightly comes in because you can erase that line very easily. If you press down really hard, you're going to have that line still left there. All right, so we have this cool little shape here. We're going to draw one more line. This line is going to be a horizontal line. Horizontal means it's going from one side to the other. Again, we're going to draw that line directly through the center of that X, and my line over here again is going to be a little bit further out than the lines that I drew for my X. So I'm going to come over here, lightly draw my line through over to the side. Notice it's not touching any sides. And what I have here, it almost looks like a wheel. So if you think of like an old wagon wheel, it looks a lot like that. Now the next step to creating my umbrella is to connect all my lines together. You can do this in a couple ways. You can draw a straight line to connect. You can draw a slightly curved line out and connect it, and it's going to make it look like it has scallops. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a curved line, but it's actually going to curve a little bit in towards the center. So again, you can watch me before you start drawing if you'd like. So see how it just has a little bit of a curve? And I'm just connecting my lines together, again, lightly with the pencil. Once I feel like I've got all my lines in place, I can go back and I can make my lines darker, or in this case, we're actually going to use a black Sharpie marker, And we're going to trace over our lines so that they are permanent and they stay in place when we go to paint. Yes, I did say paint this picture. All right, so I've got my little shape here that kind of looks like my umbrella. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our little person. So we have an umbrella that kind of is facing us because we want to be able to see that color wheel. And our person is going to be hiding behind it as if their head is kind of up here in the center. And I'm going to give my person a long raincoat because I figure if it's raining hard enough for a nice big umbrella, I probably want a little extra protection, maybe a little raincoat. So I'm going to start in these bottom two triangles, and I'm going to draw a diagonal line. Diagonal means that it's slanted from one side to the other. I'm going to do the same thing over here, diagonal line. It's almost like I'm drawing a triangle without the point or a trapezoid. Next, I'm going to draw one more line. This one is going to be diagonal, but not quite as much. And it's going to come down here. This is going to be kind of where the raincoat folds over, where the buttons will be. All right, and then I'm going to close my raincoat up. One here. And another horizontal line at the bottom. I chose to make mine so that they were not exactly the same. So if you notice, this side is a little higher than this side. You can do that, or you can make it straight across. It's however you want. All right. Next, we're going to add some legs and rain boots. So I'm going to start with just a basic rectangular shape for my legs. One, and of course we have two legs. So two rectangles. Those are my legs. And then I'm going to add boots. Now the way that I'm going to be drawing the boots is I'm going to come over here to the side of one of my rectangles, and I'm going to draw a little curved line. Notice it kind of connects to the bottom of my rectangle. That's because when we slide our legs, our feet into boots, the boots are a little bit wider than our legs. That's what helps us to be able to slide them in nice and easy. So by doing this, it's going to make it look like the boots are actually going around our legs instead of just sitting in front of our legs. Next, I'm going to draw the actual boot. So I'm going to draw a vertical line down. Once I get a little lower, I'm going to curve it out and around, kind of like I'm drawing a little shoe or the letter C right here. Then I'm going to bring the back of my boot because I don't want to go too far over here. I'm going to bring a vertical line down, and I'm going to give my boot a little heel. Not like high heels, but just to let us know that there's the end of the boot. I'm going to do the exact same thing on this side. So on my other leg, my two little curved lines. I'm going to bring my vertical line down and curve it out. Make my little C. On the other side, bring my vertical line down. Make my little heel. And I have my boots. So now the basic kind of drawing is done, but it looks really simple, really plain. So this is where you guys get to be creative and you get to start to add details. I'd love for you to add lots of details to your raincoat, to your rain boots. We're also going to add a horizon line into our artwork. And remember that horizon line is a line that makes it look like the sky and the ground touch. Notice that I'm adding it way up here and not right below the feet. That's because we want it to look like our person is standing on the ground and not hovering above it. We don't want them to look like they're just kind of starting to fly above the ground. So draw that straight horizon line back behind your person. Notice I did not draw it through the raincoat because our person's not see-through. And then I want you guys to start adding details. And the details that you add are completely up to you. I think I'm going to do things like adding buttons and pockets, maybe add some details to my rain boots. But I want to see what you guys can do here. So go ahead, start adding those details now. All right. So I've added a couple little details to mine. If you notice, I added some buttons. I've added some pockets. I added a puddle down here and made it look like my person was kind of splashing in that puddle. Polka dots to my rain boots. And then at the top, I added some clouds. I'm going to add some raindrops, but I'm actually going to be doing that in a very unique way with some crayons before we paint. So now that I have my drawing done, the next step is to trace it. So I grabbed my Sharpie. Now when you are using the Sharpie, you guys have used these in class with me before. You know my rules. It is really important that you follow a couple rules here at your house. So number one, you guys know from using these with me before, Sharpies are permanent. They are permanent markers. And so if you get them on something, a table, things like that, they don't come off. Now at school, if it gets on the table, it's not quite as big of a deal, but we don't want to get it on your desk or your table that you're using at home. So, couple things. First, be very, very, very careful with the Sharpie. Do not draw on yourself. Do not draw on your little brother or sister. Only draw on your paper, and we're only tracing over the lines that you have already drawn. If you want to add something new, do it in your pencil first before you trace. That way, if you happen to mess up, you can erase it and then redraw it. If you draw it in the Sharpie without drawing it in the pencil first and you mess up, guess what? You can't erase it. And you guys don't have extra paper to restart. All right? So, take your time. Be careful. My suggestion to you is to grab some other kind of paper. Maybe newspaper if your parents have it, a grocery bag, brown paper grocery bag, maybe a couple pieces of notebook paper, something to put on the edges and underneath, because Sharpies do have a tendency to kind of bleed through that paper, and we definitely don't want to get any Sharpies on your desk or table at home. So take a little bit of time if you need to. Find something to place underneath of your picture and make sure if it doesn't cover the whole background, you're moving it along as you trace so that you always have something underneath of your paper to trace on top of. All right? So once you have gotten everything set up and made sure that you're not going to make a mess with these Sharpies, I want you to very neatly go ahead and start tracing. You are going to trace every single line that you have drawn with your pencil. Don't leave anything out. If you are not wanting a certain line to be in your picture, make sure you erase it with your pencil. Take your time, be nice and neat. You want to try and trace on top of your lines. If you end up not tracing, directly on top of a line, like I've done here and here, you can go back with your pencil and erase those little stray lines so that you don't see them at the end of our project. Because we want our craftsmanship, remember how neatly we've done it, to be the best we possibly can. So trace everything. All right, my amazing artists, we are back to kind of work on finishing up our project. Now this may take a little while, we might not get it done today, and that is okay. But we are going to start working on coloring and painting our color wheel and our picture as a whole. Now, before I break out my watercolor paints, because that's what we're going to use, we want to make sure that we have all of our materials set up. We've already drawn and we've already traced, so we really don't need the pencil and Sharpie today. What you do need is, of course, your paper, your picture, a tray of watercolors. I have the double-sided watercolors. Use whatever you have. If you don't have watercolors, you can actually use markers, trace around the edge of it, and then just take a paintbrush with water and kind of run that paintbrush over top of the marker line, and it will bleed enough to make it almost look like a watercolor. So there is a way to kind of work around not having watercolors. So you want your watercolors, you want water, of course. So I have a little tiny cup of water that I'm going to be using. And then lastly, in order to actually paint, you need a paintbrush of some sort. Now an extra material that I have is this white crayon. So the reason that I have this white crayon is because I want to make raindrops, make it look like it's raining in my picture. But I don't want to have all my raindrops outlined in my black Sharpie. So instead I'm going to do something called a Crayon Resist. And what that means is I'm going to actually draw and color in my raindrops with a white crayon as hard as I can, because I want the wax from that crayon to be left on the paper. Now, a little science thing here, wax and water don't mix. So if I'm using a wax crayon to color and then watercolor to paint over, the watercolor's not going to paint on top of where you have the crayon. So if you would like things like raindrops, then take a little white crayon, make sure you're pressing down nice and hard, otherwise it won't work. And you can draw and color in some raindrops. You can do this just on the outside. You can do it over top your color wheel as well if you want. Raindrops would fall onto an umbrella, so you don't have to go just around the umbrella in the background. Also, and I broke my crayon. I was coloring a little too hard. It happens. If you have little areas, like I have little polka dots down here on my rain boots that might be a little difficult to paint with my watercolors, I could come in with some colorful crayons and paint those or color those as well before I paint. And that way I know that they're going to be nice and colored in without having to worry about doing it with my watercolors. It's completely up to you whether you want to do that or if you want to try coloring in small details with that watercolor. If you have little details though that you are wanting to use with your watercolors, try making sure that you have a smaller brush. A giant brush is not going to allow you to color in little tiny details. So I'm just kind of going through and adding some raindrops. I know you can't really see what I'm doing because I'm using a white crayon on white paper, but you will see it come to life once I paint my background, which will be pretty neat to see. If you're doing this, if you look really closely, you should be able to see that kind of wax residue on your paper so that you can see where you have colored in. And I'm actually going to draw a couple on top of my umbrella as well. All right. And then I'm going to kind of brush any extra wax off my paper. And I'm going to pull out my watercolor trays. Now, remember, for the actual umbrella portion of our painting, we want to use certain colors, our colors that belong in the color wheel, and we want to use them in a very specific order. Remember, we can't just throw colors on our color wheel. They all interact with each other in a very special way. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with my red. Now, if you have a double-sided watercolor tray like I do here, you want to make sure that you're using the correct side. So if you look, one side of it, you see what looks like black, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and brown. The other side, you see white. You see this almost navy blue looking color, a light blue, a dark green, a lime green, this kind of orange color, another kind of reddish looking color, and another kind of dark, okay, it has a purple tint to it. Don't use this side, all right? We're only using this side. These are what we call our primary and secondary colors, and you guys know all about those colors from first grade last year. So this is your red, not here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to grab my red paint. Notice I got my paintbrush wet first, only using the tip of my brush, getting a good amount of color on my brush, and I'm going to come up here towards the top, and as neatly as I can, trying to stay inside the lines, I'm going to paint this triangle red. Now, as I'm painting, if you're leaving puddles on your paper, make sure that you spread those puddles out. We don't want to have giant puddles to drip all over the place. It can also cause holes in our paper. And then as you're painting, if, like mine right here, your paint starts to run out, that just means you need a little bit more. So dip it in some more water, go back to your palette, get a little bit more paint, and voila. Now if you look, I had a raindrop right here. And when I painted over it, you're gonna notice that, guess what? It's still white for the most part. There is a little bit of paint on top of it. That's okay, I can always go back and kind of brush that off, but my raindrop showed through. All right, so we have our red. And then we need to go ahead and do our next primary color. So red is one primary color. Our next primary color that we're going to paint is yellow. Now we want to make sure that we rinse our brush off really, really good. So give that brush a really good bath in that water. Make sure you scrub it on the bottom, not just swishing it around the water, but you don't want to make a mess. And remember, we do want water for our watercolors. So with water on your brush, come back to your yellow. We're going to skip a triangle. Do not paint the yellow right next to it. And we're going to paint our yellow down here in our third triangle. Again, paint as neatly as you can. Try and stay in the lines the best that you can. The less water, the darker your color is going to be. The more water, the lighter your watercolor is going to be. And you're going to paint that entire triangle in. Notice where I had raindrops, the white shows through. So I had 1, 2, and then one up here in the corner. It's not quite as noticeable with the yellow simply because yellow is a lighter color, but they are there. All right, once you're done with your yellow, give that brush a bath, wash it off good. And our third primary color. Oops, and see, I made a mess. I spilt my water, so be careful as you're doing that. Don't spill that water. So as you are doing this, we're going to get our third color. So grab your blue. So again, that's going to be the blue up here in this section. Now, this one's a little different. So we're actually going to be doing 2 blues on here. So instead of just skipping one triangle, I want you to actually skip 2. And we're going to come over here. It's like creating a little triangle over here. And I want you to paint this section in. So you should have red, white, yellow, white, white, blue, white, white right now. So check on your paper before you paint to make sure that you're in the right section. Now notice I have puddles, so I'm going to spread those puddles out because I don't want to leave those on my paper to make a mess. All right, so once you have finished painting in that blue section, give that brush a really good bath. We now have all of our primary colors painted on our artwork. So now we're going to go and we're going to add our secondary colors. And remember, secondary colors are the colors that are made when you mix two primary colors together. So if we have red and yellow here, then in the center we want the secondary color that is made by mixing those two colors. So what secondary color do you make when you mix red and yellow? Orange, that's right. So you're going to come over. Remember, we're still using that same side of the tray. I know over here looks more orange, but it's not. This is a yellow orange and this is a red orange. We want to use the actual orange, which is over here. If you only have one color tray, no problem. And then in the center of those two, we're going to paint orange. Again, you now have two colors on either side that are already painted, so be careful. Try your best to stay in those lines, because if you paint over top of either of those, your paint might bleed into your red or your yellow, and you don't want that to happen. So spread out any puddles. Notice those little raindrops showing through, kind of cool. Remember, that's called a crayon resist, because the crayon is resisting the watercolor paints. All right, so now we have our first secondary color. Give that brush a good bath. Now, I know we have two sections here, but what we're looking for here is our secondary color that is made when we mix yellow and blue. So when you mix yellow and blue together, and the cool thing about a watercolor tray is they're kind of already in order in a large way. So you have yellow and blue, and right in the center of that is the secondary color we get, which is green. So I want you to grab some green on your brush and paint your triangle that's right next to the yellow. So you should still have an open white triangle right there, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. All right, our next secondary color that we're gonna make is made when we mix red and blue together. So when you mix the secondary or the primary colors of red and blue, you make the secondary color purple. So you're gonna grab your purple, and I want you to paint the purple in the triangle right next to your blue. And sometimes watercolor purples looks a little pinkish. The less water you use, the more purple it will look. All right. Now, we've got all three of our primary colors and all three of our secondary colors. So why do we still have two blank spaces? Well, the reason that we did this is because I want you guys to understand what happens when you mix other colors to your paints. So if you're working with blue and you choose to mix white, which is a neutral color, to your blue, what's going to happen to it? So what's going to happen is that blue is going to actually be much lighter. You end up making a light blue. It's like taking from a nice royal blue to a Carolina blue. So if you happen to have a watercolor tray that's double-sided like mine, you already have a light blue that you can use. If you don't have a double-sided tray and you just have one color and you don't have that light blue or that white that you can mix in, that's okay. What you're going to do is you're just going to use more water. With watercolor, the cool thing is the more water you use, the lighter your color will be. The less water you use, the darker your color will be. So you might just need to use a little more water and a little less paint. And if you look, those colors actually look kind of close together. So I'm going to be using more water as well. So I've already got paint down. Instead of grabbing more paint when mine starts to run out, instead I'm going to grab more water to help spread that color out. So notice I'm not grabbing any more paint because watercolor will spread with just water. So I just grabbed water, and by doing that, my color lightened up a little bit. So now we have a light blue and a dark blue because we wanted to show that light blue is made by mixing white with a color on our color wheel. Now we have this section. What happens when you mix white with red? You end up making a pink. So now my watercolor tray, even with the double-sided watercolor tray, does not have pink in it. So I'm going to have to use the technique I just talked to you guys about with my red. And I'm going to just have to use more water. So notice I got just a little bit of red on my brush. Well, same color. Instead of getting more red on my brush, I'm going to go back, grab more water, and I'm going to start spreading out my watercolor paint with the water. I still don't want to leave puddles, but I want to use way more water than I do paint. And by doing that, I end up with pink. All right, so you now have your watercolor color wheel completed. We still need to paint the rest of this. So how you paint the rest of this is completely up to you. You've done your watercolor color wheel. So now choose how you want the rest of your painting to be painted, your artwork to be painted, and go ahead and do that. So I'm going to kind of let you guys do that, and I'll come back and show you mine when it's all finished. All right, guys, so this is my finished product. Notice that I have painted the whole thing. Other than my little white raindrops that I colored with a white crayon before I painted, there's really not any white left on the paper. Now, again, you are creating your own, so maybe you have an area that absolutely needs white, but I want you to take your time, paint as neatly as you can, and I want you to do your very best to fill up as much of the paper as you can. Again, paint neat. If you need an area to dry a little bit before you go and paint an area next to it so that it doesn't bleed those watercolors everywhere, then do that. But take your time, be neat, do your very best, and paint that whole thing so that you are not leaving a ton of extra area. I cannot wait to see the masterpieces that you guys create when you are completely done with this. Super excited. All right, guys. So get to work, paint those pictures. Can't wait to see your masterpieces.